I'm not going to sit by while more good people die and they get 24 or 48 or 72 hours of TV coverage, and then we all just say, well, there's nothing we can do until the next time people are murdered by gun violence. Here in Cleveland, you know this. Tamir Rice isn't here either. He should be. He should be healthy. He should be alive.
It comes down to a split second or two if you're lucky. That space of time when a cop has to make a decision based on what she or he sees at the moment, and then decide whether or not deadly force is necessary to save their life or protect those around them. We've seen far too many instances in the last year or so, evidence of cops perhaps acting hastily or outside the law. Likely thousands more we don't see, and millions more where cops do their job correctly and do serve and protect. But a pair of findings in the Tamir Rice shooting have done nothing to settle the issue of why a 12-year-old boy was killed and where final responsibility lies. From Cleveland, where he's been talking about this case since the day it happened, on WHK 1420 The Answer, weekday mornings 9 to 11 Eastern, Bob Frantz. And from the perspective of law enforcement, former NYPD officer, now radio talker on 1290 WJNO in West Palm Beach, Florida, John Cardillo. Gentlemen, thanks so much for joining us. Bob, I'm going to go ahead and start with you. The reaction now, the Cleveland officer who shot Tamir Rice acted reasonably according to 2 reviews. The initial reaction from your listeners when it was announced.
Well, it depends on whether or not the listeners themselves are reasonable. Anybody with a pair of eyes who watched the videotape, and particularly anybody who actually read the reports, the investigative conclusions drawn by those 2 outside investigative firms, they know that this is exactly what the police officer had to do. On the other hand, there are a lot of unreasonable people in Cleveland. There are community activists, there are black activists, there are clergy activists who, of course, are not going to believe their lying eyes. Anything that these investigative reports turn up that is not in favor of prosecuting and hanging these police officers is not going to be good enough. They accuse the investigators of being pro-police and anti-black life.
Bob, here's a tough question for you. What about those people who will hear that answer, listen to all this, and they will say, Bob, you're a white guy in Cleveland. You can't understand what went on, and that's why you call it, and even may think to call it, unreasonable.
Well, it's very simple, and it doesn't matter what color you are. The park and recreation center that we're talking about, Ed, is a well-known gang hangout. Cops respond to gun runs there very frequently. It is a known drug haven. This 12-year-old kid who looked, by the way, like he was 20, in fact, that's what one of the officers called it in as after he was down. They said a 20-year-old black male, 5'7", 195 he turned out to be. This kid was in a park trying to play the role. He took the orange tip off of his replica Colt 45. The media needs to stop calling it a pellet gun. It's a replica Colt 45 and used it to terrorize people, pointed it at people's heads. Even the guy who called 911 turned his back and made sure that Tamir was not looking at him when he called him in because he didn't want to get shot. So to those people, I would say it's not about race. It's about watch your kids, make sure you know what quote-unquote toys they have, and make sure they're not going into a known gang hangout and terrorizing people with a fake gun.
All right, John, from the cop's perspective then, here comes the one I hear a lot. The cop involved in the case, first of all, they did not have to race up on him in the car. They didn't have to get right up to him. They could have stayed 10, 15, 20, 30 feet, 10, 20 yards away, whatever, and still done the same thing. And the cop did not have to get out of the car and shoot immediately. As a law enforcement professional, how do you answer both of those?
Well, look, there are tactical problems with the case, but I feel like I had dinner with Bob Frantz last night. He echoes my thoughts almost to the letter. I've responded to a lot of gun runs. I don't know how many, hundreds, maybe more. My command was the most dangerous square mile in America when I worked there. And I'm a gun collector. I'm an avid shooter. It took me a very long and deep analysis when I put a 1911 side by side with the weapon Tamir Rice was holding. They look identical. This looks like what's called a target modified race gun that competition shooters use every day. It's indistinguishable in a photograph from someone like me. For someone like me, for a police officer racing on the scene, that is a real gun. And if you underestimate that, that's how you die as a cop. Now, could things have been done tactically different? Sure. Did they race up a little quickly for my tastes? Yes. But nothing the officers did was illegal. Everything they did was in line with proper use of deadly physical force. And I think the decision not to indict or prosecute was absolutely the right one. Like Bob Frantz says, unreasonable people will refuse to see that.
Here comes the other one, though, and this is the same sort of case, the same sort of people, John. They will say if this was a white kid in an affluent neighborhood carrying a gun, that the cops would not have rolled up and they would not have gotten out and shot him if it was exactly the same, but just white and different neighborhood. How do you answer that?
That's a false narrative, a terribly false narrative. I use these stats on my show all the time. There was a study of police use of force incidents from, I believe it was 2003 to 2009, maybe a little bit longer. In 98.9 million arrests, 98.9 million arrests, the police actually used fatal force on whites 2 times that they did on blacks. But each group, when adjusted for population, it was irrelevant because each group had the same amount of interactions with the police. So blacks, even though they're 1/6 the population of whites, they interact with the police the same time. In other words, in 100 interactions with police, 40 white, 40 black, the whites are still 2 times more likely to be shot and killed by police. This is a media construct, this disproportionate use of force on blacks. It's a progressive media construct and an absolute false narrative.
I got 20 seconds left for you, Bob. Knowing full well that the investigation still is continuing, there still may be charges brought. What is the feeling in Cleveland at this point that charges will not be brought? And are they preparing just in case there are no charges for what may or may not occur?
Well, considering that an outside reverend speaking about these 2 investigations that were just done said that here's what we're going to do. We're going to bring a little bit of the Ferguson action to Cleveland in order to protest this. That's how they believe. So, yes, there's a very strong belief there is not going to be an indictment, and they're preparing quote-unquote protests. But when they say Ferguson impact or Ferguson action, they're talking about riots. And, yes, the city is getting prepared.
We're going to stay in touch with both of you. The conversation will continue. Bob Frantz, 1420 WHK in Cleveland. John Cardillo, 1290 WJNO in West Palm Beach, Florida. Gentlemen, thanks so much. The racist element is next on The Hardline.